What's up everyone, this video is going to be me showing you how I made this lo-fi hip hop track, which I'm going to demo in 2 seconds. It's going to be using just free samples, free VSTs and some stock plugins in Ableton, and I'm also going to have the project file in the description down below. So yeah, everything I use plugin wise will also have an equivalent in pretty much every other DAW going, so FL Studios, Logic, etc. But yeah, here's the demo.
Sometimes that kind of blues will make you even kill.
So yeah, I'm just going to walk through the project file, go over the effects and the VSTs that I've used. The only non-stock Ableton plugin that I used was the Spitfire Labs soft piano and the synth pads, which I've talked about before. Really great free resource if you've not checked out already, but I'm sure most of you already have. But I'll link that in the description below. And the sample that I used I found on a post on Reddit on the Lo-Fi District, which summarises loads of free kits as well as like effect racks, free VSTs, free sample packs. So I'll link that in the description down below. I'll just pop up the packs that I downloaded. So it's the Bido packs, HM Surf packs, Afternoon Perk Foley kit, which is really good, and the X Shawls Lo-Fi kit, which I think I mentioned before on this channel. It's quite a popular kit that's been floating around Reddit for a few years, and it's got some really good sounds in. And quickly before I open up Ableton, just a quick message from this video's sponsor, which is DistroKid. I've mentioned DistroKid before. They're the distributor that I use to get my music onto Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, and all the sort of major platforms. And if you didn't already know, if you want to get music on Spotify or Apple Music, you need to go through a distributor, and DistroKid is the best in my opinion for artists. There's 2 plans that you can start with. The first is $20 a year, and that's one-off payment. You get 100% of your royalties. And the second is $36 a year, which is the one that I'm on. So unlike the first plan, you can have 2 artists if you've got 2 A-listers, but most importantly for me is that you can pick a release date, which means that for Spotify, it'll pop up on your Spotify artist page, which is really easy to claim with DistroKid, and it means you can pitch your track to the Spotify creators for the official playlists. You can get potentially millions of views from those playlists, and you need to be able to set a release date to do that. So that's the main benefit of using the second plan, and there's other bits as well that are benefited from that. But unlike other distributors, DistroKid is a one-time payment, as I said before, so sometimes you might pay less or pay nothing to join the distributor, and they'll upload your music to Spotify, but then they'll take a cut of the royalties. And even if you've never released music before, there's a good chance that within the first year you'll earn enough royalties to make back the cost of buying DistroKid, and most likely more. So yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out DistroKid. Recently they've got new features like getting your music on TikTok, and they've got the hyper follow, which lets you generate a page before your music comes out where people can pre-save your link on Spotify. Also, like 90% of the other artists I've worked with for collaborations are also on DistroKid, which makes it dead easy to split profits. So you can pick what percentage goes to who, and then DistroKid sorts all that out, which is a great feature to have. But yeah, if you're interested, I'll drop a link in the description down below. That'll get you 7% off your first year, so be sure to click that if you want to join, or feel free to drop any questions about DistroKid. I've been using it for about a year now, so I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. And thanks to DistroKid for sponsoring this video. Without any further delays, here is the tutorial. So yeah, I'm just going to go through each individual track and go over how I processed the sounds. So this first track is a staple in lo-fi tracks, which is the background noise. In this one I've used vinyl, which is pretty common. People also use tape noise, like coffee shop recordings, nature noise, any sort of background ambience you can find. This is actually from my free pack that I released a couple of weeks ago, which I'll drop the link down below. It's got some free vinyl samples, MIDI files, guitar loops, piano loops, etc. So I'll link that in the description down below. But I dragged that from that. I just dropped in the audio sample, and I made sure not to warp it, because when you warp it, even the Complex Pro, anything like that, it can make it sound a little bit weird for vinyl, because there's not really any sort of structure or rhythm to it. Just dragged it in and copied it, because the transition between the two is pretty seamless. And then I added a bit of a fade in at the start, which in Ableton. And then I've also done a high cut and a low cut with the auto filter, so it's just cutting the frequencies below this band. The reason being, this is what it sounds like normally, and then with the low cut, it gets a lot of the low end out because it's a bit muddy, and the high just takes off the edge for it. So yeah, that's that. Next group is the piano group. So for this, there are 3 different tracks that I've grouped together. So with Ableton you can click on the tracks, shift and click 3, and then right click and group them together. And that means that anything I do to the group track processes through the individual layers, and it's a habit that's really worth getting into because it makes mixing so much easier, as you can apply the same effect to different tracks, and it sort of glues them together a bit, and stops, like, if you've got different reverb on each track, it can make it a bit muddy. So yeah, a great way of doing it. Before I go into the group track, I'll start with this one, which is just a Labs soft piano, reverb completely off. Not much you can change with the Labs piano, but it does sound great anyway. And that's sounds like this. And this MIDI file was actually also taken from my free pack, which I've linked in the description down below. So with the piano side of things, generally if you are comfortable doing it, I'd play it in and play it sort of a little bit more natural, so you're not playing all the same notes perfectly on the beat, as it can sound a bit stiff. You want a bit of a sort of delay on the chords, like here it's not quite starting on the beat, there's a bit of a offset on some of the notes. Just makes it sound more natural and more interesting. And then usually you can emphasise the first note that you play, and then you can mess about with the velocities if you want to, which I've not done on this because it didn't really need it in my opinion. But yeah, so that's that. Just basic chord progression. If you are going to get chord progressions, a lot of the time the MIDI packs, I can't remember what it's called, there's a big MIDI pack that gets pushed a lot on adverts for me. I've seen some of the files at the minute and they're all very much completely quantized. It's just chords, there's no sort of characters to it. So if you were going to use that, you could go in and then drag the notes just a little bit off beat, change the velocities a little bit, make it a little bit flow a bit better, maybe add some extra notes in. But yeah, that's that file. The next thing I did was I took this and then I freezed it, flattened it, and basically that means that it just takes all the processing I've done to that track, records it, and then flattens the track down to an audio file. I did it this time so I could take a little snippet here of the piano and just reverse it. So if you click on the file you can reverse here, and it just sort of transitions it a bit nicer. So if I play it, it just builds up to the next chords rather than sort of fading out to them. That sounds really cool. And the next thing I did was play a bit of a solo on top. So I found the key of the track and then just messed about with some notes within that key, putting emphasis on the notes that have been played at the time, and came up with this little riff. So it's quite ambient. I've got the sustain pedal held down for most of it, and this sort of just blends into the track a bit better. Again, this is the Labs piano, but this time I've added a bit of effects process into just this individual track. First thing was autopan. What autopan does is, in this situation, different frequencies of the track will be panned left to right at different times. So there's this sort of frequency here, and it's not 100%, so it's not going completely right, completely left. It's just somewhere in the middle. I was going to add some chorus on, but I didn't think I needed it in the end. And then again with the auto filter, because I didn't really want this to clash with the main chords. I just wanted a sort of top end melody on top, so I cut some of the low end there. And then I added some filter delay. And filter delay I use a lot. It's basically 3 different delay channels. One that's on the left, panned completely left, one panned completely right, and one central. And then delay time on the 363 here. And I'm filtering this section here, and this is just the section that's going to be delayed. So if I had a big piano track and I just wanted the top end to be delayed, I could just filter it here, or I can make it pretty much the whole track, or narrow it down to a specific bit. And the feedback is just how long it delays for. So if you set it to 100%, it's going to keep delaying for the whole track, or 0%, it'll just delay once and then stop. And then the volume of the actual individual delay there, and then the wet and dry knob. So that's that. And then I've grouped it together here, and I've added this tape plugin which I've used before on my channel if you've watched my previous videos. It's effectively just various Ableton stock plugins, so utility, saturation, etc. all added into one rack, which you can do yourself if you sort of want a different setup. But this one I took from the Elephant producer on YouTube. I'll link in the description down below to get this. But effectively it's let me add some colour, which in this case is just adding an EQ to take away some of the top and low end. Added some drive, so some saturation, a bit of distortion, a bit of compression, just to glue all the different piano tracks together. and then some wow plus the tape sort of frequency shift that you get, which adds a bit of movement to the track. And then that's it for this. I then got an auto filter, which I'm not using except for with automation. So with automation I can make it so that the filter goes from the 20 kilohertz all the way down to 122 hertz. So it's cutting the top end, right up until the drop, when it shoots back up again when the kick comes in, and it just sort of transitions into the next phase a bit more. And then I've got a gentle squeeze compressor, which is taking the high level and the low level volume and just squeezing them a little bit to make it more consistent. But the main reason I've got this is because I've got a side chain to the kick, and what this does is that when the kick is playing, the compressor will dip away some of the volume on the piano just to make room for the kick. So that's the piano layer. Next I had this synthy background noise. So this again is from Labs. So yeah, I'm using synth pad number 7. You can play with quite a lot, release, sustain, decay, etc. For this one I made sure the attack to 0 and made it quite heavy on the reverb. The reason being that they've got quite a high attack anyway, and I didn't want it to be too long before the notes started kicking in. So I've dropped that down to 0, and it still seems to have a bit of attack anyway. So it sounds like this. So you can still hear a bit of attack, and it's got quite a long decay at the end. And for this I've added quite a lot of saturation just to give it that sort of distorted, slightly compressed sound. I have automated that again so that when the next bit kicks in it drops a bit, because on the next bit I've added here it's just a C and a G, and then on the next bit I've added the same notes an octave higher as well, so there was too much saturation when that kicked in, so I dropped it down just to accommodate that. And then again an auto filter just to get rid of the low end so it's not too muddy in the mix, and a bit of a heavy auto pan, so again the frequencies are shifting more and more left to right as the track goes on, so it goes from a single note to a more full double note which is just the same note an octave higher. I really love the synth pads. I've used quite a few of them in different tracks that I made, and it's a great tool to get, and it's completely free, so I would definitely recommend checking that out. Next we've got this group 7, which is the highs and mids. I usually add Foley into this as well, but I haven't in this case. So I group these together because I like to apply effects to the high and the mids together, but not the kick, because there's a lot of effects that I use here that I wouldn't want on the kick. So I've got the simple hi-hat pattern, which is just a heavy hat and then a softer hat, so change the velocities, so it's a bit more of a rhythm to it. And I've made some of the hi-hats slightly offbeat just to give it a bit of a human feel. It's not completely quantized, so they sound like this. I usually keep that quite simple. And then for the mid, I've used a typical snare sound, so snare 8, and I've layered that with some perks from the perk kit that I mentioned at the start of the video. Basically I've done a perk 1 and a snare, but the snare's a little bit less in velocity, trying to keep it a little bit too quieter so it doesn't overpower the other perk. And again I've made it slightly offbeat at times just to give it a bit of a human feel. And there's this little perk here as well, just to add a bit more variation. So that's all I've done there. And again, in terms of processing, I've cut the high for the snare. I've also cut the high on the hi-hat because I like to keep the hi-hat a little bit more muffled. I don't want it too sharp in my lo-fi mixes. It's just the sort of sound that I'm going for. So if I play it without, it just takes the edge off a bit, and it sounds a bit more lo-fi. And then for those, again, I've added the tape rack on there, so a bit of colour, a bit of drive, compression, and some reverb with a bit of a high cut on there, just so it's not too heavy on the hi-hat on the reverb. Made the room size massive, and quality I always set to high. If you set it to high, it's a little bit higher on the processor, but it's really quite a light plug-in anyway, so it's not that big a deal unless you've got a really old PC. So I would always recommend setting that to high, about 25% on the dry right knob there. And then I've got the kick, which is just a bit of a subby kick, and this sort of grit layer, which just adds a bit of high. I didn't really like the high on this, so I cut that off, and I laid it with this, which I've low cut, so it's not clashing on the low end, and it's just adding a bit to the top. So you just hear it a little bit of a click at top, and then the sub bass there. And then with the kick, I like to vary the velocities quite a lot. So I'd like to do a little low velocity kick that just sort of flows into the main kick a little bit better. And overall throughout I've changed the velocities quite a bit because I played it in on the drum pads, which I like to do with the kicks. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the kick. Then got the hip hop sub bass, which is a preset in Ableton, which is just basically a sine wave with a bit of attack on this case, which is here, and a bit of a release, and then some LFO and filter on there as well. But yeah, this is a preset, operator preset for Ableton, but yeah, as I say, you can make it with any sort of DAW really. So I then added a bass cab, which is just simulating the bass cab from a bass guitar, a 4x10" bass cab with the microphone near on axis, condenser and output mono. I always have the bass on mono, as having a sort of a wide bass can be difficult mix wise. 100% on the dry wet knob, so it basically softens it a bit. So this is what it sounds like without and with. So it softens it a bit, makes it sound a bit more natural that it's been recorded. And then again, I've added a gentle squeeze compressor just so I can add the kick sidechain on there, quite heavy, again so it ducks out of the way for the bass. And that's pretty much it. I also added in this Sons of House interview I found on YouTube, just to add a bit of character to the introduction.
Just like I sung one of them songs a while ago when I put a voice in there.
But yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.